Since it began 10 years ago, NinjaGo has always done one thing very well, and that's the interactions between the characters. Whether that be a master-student relationship, siblings, friends, or significant others, the large cast of characters means that there's often fun character dynamics in each episode. Since Valentine's Day is soon approaching, I thought I'd take a look at some of my favorite relationships the show has to offer. Some of these might be romantic in nature, while others are platonic. I'm just going to go over the character dynamics that I find interesting. Using the Valentine's Day tie-in as a jumping-off point, let's take a look at Jay and Nia. To say that these two have always had a solid relationship wouldn't necessarily be the truth. I've gone over the much-maligned love triangle and Rebooted and how it actively worked against established character dynamics, but while it wasn't handled well, ultimately it did help lead to one of the show's strongest relationships. Starting off with Season 1, Jay's crush on Nia was another example of the unrequited young love trope found in lots of media, especially kids' media. Look through the list of animated kids content on Disney Channel alone and you'll find multiple instances of it over a number of years. Like many other shows, it was a footnote used to establish early character interactions and dynamics, and for the first few weeks of NinjaGo's run, late in 2011 and early 2012, I thought it would follow the same predictable format where person A has a crush on person B and tries to express their love, but nothing ever comes of it. So, much to my surprise, the show actually developed the relationship further by having the two go out on a date. Not only did it develop Jay's character and tie into the moral of the episode, but also further the plot by revealing Nia's identity as Samurai X to the rest of the team. So hey, at least they did something with it, but after that, the fact that they were in a relationship became a footnote. And that's not to say it was a bad thing necessarily. Season 1 is plenty busy and any more time spent focusing on them could have taken away from other important happenings. Season 2 was much the same. A few mentions that Jay and Nia are a couple, but overall it wasn't a focus and was pretty much a bullet point on their wiki pages. So up until this point, the fact that Jay and Nia were together was totally fine and was okay to be left as a footnote since the show had better things to do with its time. This is probably why spending a large amount of time on the love triangle in Season 3 feels so weird and forced. Their relationship is a footnote, so we don't actually know how we should be feeling about Nia being conflicted over Jay and Cole. At the time, for all we knew, Cole could have actually been a better match for Nia. If you want my full thoughts on the nonsense that followed though, watch my Rebooted series if you haven't already. But as a quick TLDR, the love triangle diminished Nia's character from the first 2 seasons and made both Jay and Cole unlikable with how childish they acted during the whole thing. It was bad taking a footnote relationship and having it be so front and center. If they wanted to do it now, it would be annoying but would work better since their relationship has been developed so much. But the paradox of that is that however poorly it was handled the first time around, the love triangle was what helped make them a stronger couple at the end of the day. Jay and Nia's former relationship got very little screen time in Tournament of Elements and Possession, with Cole and Jay making up over it and restoring their friendship getting more focus. Then in Skybound, we finally got some of Nia's perspective on the whole thing, with her wish to not be defined by the men in her lives. With a better understanding between the two, Jay and Nia reconcile and get back together after Nautocon's defeat, and they've been together ever since, even becoming engaged or married depending on how you look at the Yang Gang Promise thing. While the relationship has since become more of a footnote in the overall story, thanks to the events of Skybound, we have a better sense of what the relationship is like and so have cause to care for it now, making the loving interactions between them more obvious. This has almost had the opposite effect, as somewhat recently, people in the community have taken issue of Nia not returning any I love yous to Jay. The argument about love languages has come up, but I think the best example of Nia's feelings of Jay are in Season 13, when she gets jealous over the Munch Queen's obvious attractions to her yin, and even faces her in combat over it. You don't duel to the death over someone you don't really love, people. With Nia getting more focus in the story this year, I'm sure that Jaya will get plenty of mentions and screen time, helping to make it one of NinjaGo's longest-lasting relationships. Of course, when we talk about long-lasting, I have to mention the Garmadons. I was going to split this into separate categories at first, but combining them makes for really interesting dynamics. First, though, let's start with Wu and Garmadon. The brothers turned against each other plot isn't new. I mean, for Pete's sake, Cain and Abel started that one all the way back in Genesis. LEGO even used it before with Bionicle, at first having Motunui and Makuta being literal brothers before slowly retconning that into metaphorical brothers, and then going back to literal brothers with Ikimu and Makuta in G2. While the plot device isn't new, Wu and Garmadon have a slightly unique spin on it since the evil brother is redeemed and they get to actually be brothers again. Before Garmadon dies and is brought back as evil and their enemies again, and who knows where they're at after March of the Oni. This is all interesting as is, but then there are 2 new parties to the family thrown in, Misako and Lloyd. The Misako Garmadon Wu love triangle I don't actually hate, despite hating love triangles in general, mostly because to a degree it's concluded and is used as backstory. I loved that part of Garmadon's fall from grace before he was totally evil was giving in to temptation and signing his name on Wu's love letter for Misako, essentially stealing her away from his brother. A lot has been said about Misako having a bad character, and to a degree I concur, but I find her relationship with Wu to be very fascinating. She loves Garmadon even after learning that the letter wasn't his. And while Wu and Misako remain close, she doesn't move on to him after Garmadon's sacrifice. And neither does Wu try to win her over despite being totally devoted to her as we see in the Dark Island trilogy. Neither of them crossed that line and remain faithful to the memory of the good man Garmadon was, which I think says a lot about both of their characters, Wu's especially. Despite everything his brother did while evil, Wu still respects his brother's relationship with Misako. And from that relationship we get Lloyd, the destined green and golden ninja. Lloyd's relationship with his parents is filled with so much depth and intrigue that it's crazy to think this all comes from a kid's toy TV show. As flawed a plan as it was, Misako leaving Lloyd at Darkly School for bad boys to ensure her son and husband didn't have to fight a destined battle was done out of love. A question I have, though, is has Lloyd truly come to terms with it? He questions it at first when he meets Misako in Season 2, but then after that, he and his mom seem to be on pretty good terms. It'll be interesting if someday that becomes a point of conflict, or if it'll just remain in the show's lore but never get mentioned. So, from that perspective, even though there isn't much focus on it, Lloyd's relationship with his mom is very interesting. Even more interesting is Lloyd's relationships with his uncle and father. In a lot of ways, Wu was a surrogate father that Lloyd never had. While Garmadon was off in the realm of madness and then later conspiring to take over NinjaGo with the mega weapon, who was there for Lloyd to guide and teach him? Wu was. Yes, the other ninja were later also responsible for lots of Lloyd's training, but Wu was at the center of most of it. An interesting thing about their relationship is also that Wu knows how Lloyd was almost his son. Had things gone differently with Misako, Lloyd could have been his child instead. While not brought up in the show, Wu mentions this in his Dark Island journals. It's stuff like this that the show glosses over lots of the time, but when you stop to think about it, it makes all the little seemingly inconsequential character interactions really interesting. But of course, the big one is Lloyd's relationship with his father. This right here is my favorite character dynamic in the entire show. Garmadon is already evil from the time Lloyd is born from what we can tell, so Lloyd grows up without knowing his dad for the first 10 years of his life. When Wu goes to the realm of madness to tell Garmadon what's happened, Garmadon is surprisingly concerned for his son's safety. Like how the brother against brother plot isn't new, father versus son isn't new either. It wasn't new in 1980 when Vader told Luke Skywalker that he was his father, but that doesn't stop it from being compelling storytelling and a good twist. So how do you add something new to this story? Show the cracks in Garmadon's evil self by showing that he still cares about something other than himself, case in point, his son. I'd argue that movie Garmadon was actually a little more evil than his TV show counterpart in this regard, because he knew he had a son but was so consumed by his want to conquer NinjaGo that he didn't care all that much about him until they started interacting. Show Garmadon wanted to conquer NinjaGo as well, but he still loved Lloyd, and that made him conflicted. It helped flesh him out as a character and make him intriguing to fans in the early days of the show. While Anakin's love for Luke is what ultimately defeated the Emperor, Anakin was forced to sacrifice himself to save his son. He was redeemed, but he also had to pay for his sins while acting as Darth Vader. Garmadon is interesting because he received a stay of execution in this regard. After the poorly named final battle, he got time to spend with his family and try and make up for the wrongs he did instead of being killed off. Of course, this all caught up with him in Tournament of Elements, but it was great to see Sensei Garmadon flourish a bit and see him and Lloyd become very close. And that loving relationship then turns tragic with Sons of Garmadon. Whatever loving relationship that did exist in the mind of Garmadon is gone, and the beatdown Lloyd receives in Cryptarium prison is proof of that. Father and son then spend hunted as enemies, and Garmadon even adopts Harumi as a replacement for Lloyd, his twisted heart growing to love her in place of his actual son. I'm really interested in when we'll see Garmadon again after March of the Oni. I think leaving it where they did was smart because I'm not sure doing a Garmadon redemption story twice is necessarily the right call, but you can tell that there is something stirring inside him that is fighting against his darker impulses. It may not be as strong as before, but it is still there, and how pretty much totally evil Garmadon deals with it this time around could be fascinating. And also, is Lloyd willing to trust his father again? They worked together reluctantly in March of the Oni, but as we saw, Lloyd still has issues with this version of his father. I wonder if Lloyd even considers evil Garmadon to be his father, or if he just looks at him as some Oni demon. So the question remains, should they meet again, and let's be honest, they will it be a chilled but eventually happy reunion, or a rematch for the ages? So, looking over what I've written thus far, I know I have a lot more to say on lots of other characters, but considering how long this video probably is already, maybe a part 2 is in order. If you're interested in hearing more on my thoughts on the relationship dynamics in NinjaGo, leave a comment down below. I'm also experimenting with monetization a little bit with this video, which is why I didn't use any video clips or background music as to avoid any potential copyright claims. Let me know if that made the video feel weird, or if my thoughts and opinions more than made up for that lack of presentation. I always want my videos to be the best they can be, so if you felt the presentation suffered for the sake of monetization, please let me know. Either way, thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully be back with more NinjaGo content very soon.